Can a best-of-1 game like Master Duel ever be competitive? That is the question MBT and friends asked on the latest episode of Magical Hats. As someone who is very competitive in a game that is exclusively best-of-1, namely Cardfight Vanguard, I figured I'd throw my hat into the ring and give you my thoughts. First, let's set the stage. Card games inherently have variance, meaning some games will be won or lost by luck, regardless of the player's input or skill. Preparation in the forms of deck building and technical play can slightly diminish the impact of this variance, but it will never be truly gone. Despite this luck factor in card games, top players still perform relatively consistently because their result isn't relying on one single game. A major event like a YCS, for example, will probably have around 11 rounds, and within those 11 rounds, you can afford to lose 2 matches. Within those matches, Yu-Gi-Oh's TCG also has a best-of-3 system, meaning you play 3 games and you can afford to lose 1. This makes it so despite luck playing a factor, better players will relatively often perform better than worse players. This is essentially the current status quo argument. Best of 3 is competitive and best of 1 is not, because luck has a higher chance of impacting the outcome of your games. But let's talk about what it means for a game to be competitive. In my opinion, competitive viability of a game is solely defined by how reliably better players do better than worse players. Nothing else. It's not about fun, it's not about viewer experience, it's not about time schedules, only how reliably do better players do better. This is why chess is an extremely competitively viable game, and rolling dice to see who rolls higher is not. And when you really grasp that idea, this whole debate of best of 3 versus best of 1 really starts to fall apart. Will better players generally do better in a best of 3 rather than a best of 1 setting? Of course. In a best of 3, there are more opportunities for bad players to misplay, and there are more opportunities for good players to outplay their opponent. But what if we flip it on its head? Why is Yu-Gi-Oh not best of 5? Why is Yu-Gi-Oh not best of 7? Why is Yu-Gi-Oh not best of 51? Clearly, better players would perform better in a best of 7 rather than in a best of 3. There are more opportunities for bad players to misplay, and there are more opportunities for good players to outplay their opponents. Opening one of 3 dimension shifters in a 40 card deck is statistically gonna happen once in every 3 games or so. That means in a best of 3 setting, you're bound to randomly lose to a dimension shifter once in every 3 games. Beyond that, in a best of 3 setting, you only get to go first once if your opponent won the die roll. That is extremely unfair. But in a best of 73, it is far more likely the better player is gonna win more often because these luck factors will have less of an impact, right? This means best of 3 can never be truly competitive. Clearly, this is hyperbole. I am not arguing that Yu-Gi-Oh should be a best of 235 format, but what I am trying to illustrate is that 3 is just a number that happens to be higher than 1. There is no reason why best of 3 should be the cutoff where competitive viability begins and that 1 just so happens to fall outside of that. Competitive viability is a spectrum, and at the very bottom, we will find the made-up game of rolling dice to see who rolls highest, and at the top, we will find games like chess. Somewhere at the higher middle, we might find poker, because again, that dice rolling game, there is virtually no player input that will impact whether a better player will actually perform better. Whereas in chess, the better players almost always beat the worst players. Slightly above our dice rolling game, we might then find something like Uno, where worse players relatively often still beat better players, but there's still some input. But as far as I'm aware, the +4 card is kind of like reverse Max C, right? Now on this spectrum, somewhere, we can place best of 3 Yu-Gi-Oh. Would it be higher than best of 1 Yu-Gi-Oh? Probably yes, but not by much. But to arbitrarily then draw the line and say this is competitive and this is not is quite frankly super unnuanced, and I would raise you, you are not a competitive Yu-Gi-Oh player until you top a best of 11 YCS. To further illustrate this point, let's talk about another card game that is exclusively best of 1. Cardfight Vanguard. Now you do not need to know the rules for this, but let me explain. Vanguard's major events are all best of 1, from Springfest to BCS to even Worlds. Would I like for it to be best of 3? Sure, but for now, it's not. It's best of 1. And some people live in a delusion that this game is extremely luck-based because of the trigger mechanic. Yet somehow, there are plenty of players topping extremely consistently. There are players that top almost every event they attend. I say almost because obviously variance will still play its part as it does in every card game, but if there are a large number of players topping very consistently, then surely we still need to ascribe a level of competitive viability to the game, despite its best of 1 setting. Another example of this is literally Master Duel itself. We've seen the Master Circuit series and the Challenger Cups being held lately. Both had lots of participants. I know a player, Quantal, who topped in the TCG Nationals, who attended 3 of these events. He played in 2 MCS and in 1 Challenger Cup. He topped all of them and even won one of them. So clearly, better players seemingly still do better, despite this best of 1 setting. But the argument can go even deeper than this, because so far we have only assumed that this game is completely static. We've pretended like we've taken the exact same game and just moved it from best of 3 to best of 1 and vice versa. But this is not how Yu-Gi-Oh works. Formats change. Card pools change. If we take our dice rolling game and move it from best of 3 to best of 303, nothing will change the fact that it is still gonna be a random game. It doesn't become more competitively viable by just moving it up between best of 3 and best of infinite. The core mechanics simply don't allow the players to have meaningful impact in the game. Something very similar happens when going from format to format in Yu-Gi-Oh! It is entirely possible that one format in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is going to be more competitively viable than another. A good example of this is the recent Ishizu Tearlament format we saw in the TCG. When Ishizu Tier took over, we saw competitive topping players top and do well more consistently because the deck had answers to almost every situation, and game states became so complex that only the best of the best could fully maximize what the deck could do. We can contrast this with the 2022 Nationals format, where I saw some of the best players do pretty poorly overall. The format was wide open, so preparation had less impact. There were game-ending floodgates that just decided the game on their own without really any player impact playing a part whatsoever. It essentially turned the format into better draw the out. Does this mean it was pure luck? Of course not. There were still topping players topping, but just less so. If we went back to our spectrum, we could place our Ishizu Tier format higher and our 2022 Nats format a little lower. These are two completely different formats, two completely different styles of Yu-Gi-Oh! Even, that completely differ in competitive viability. And this brings us to another strong argument MBT actually gave on this Magical Hats episode. Sometimes best of 3 can make your game weirdly even more luck-based. If the side deck allows you to side in Saki floodgates that when flipped just auto-win you the game when going first, then your match might be literally decided by did I draw the thing and did my opponent draw the out, rather than by skillful gameplay and back and forth that you may have had in a game 1 where you couldn't side into them yet because you didn't know if you were going first or second. Your game 1 might have been an epic battle of engine versus engine and skillful wits, but your game 2 or 3 could have literally been haha, Drew dimensional barrier. In a best of 1 setting, you will far more often be punished for playing these types of cards because you cannot predict if you will go first or second, and going second, a lot of these cards are just dead. But in a best of 3 setting, they are essentially a requirement for your side deck. Hell, even the current TCG format has some great examples of this. If Kashtira gets full combo and you did not draw Nibiru, well, I hope you top deck Kurikara. If they Ibli lock you on top, well, I hope you draw Enemy Controller or Book of Eclipse. And then they go, oh, I hope I drew Ash. Oh, you didn't? Oh, I'm so sorry. Better luck next time, buddy. Scoop it up. Sign the slip right here. sign it. I won. Take it. If Branded sides in Gimmick Puppet and you did not draw one of the very, very few outs, again, here's the slip. Sign it. Sign the slip. Scoop it up. It's over. Sign. Sign. Ibli and Gimmick Puppet are both great examples of cards that turn the game into a sackfest that are mostly empowered and made viable by a best of 3 setting. Now, obviously, this isn't me arguing that Yu-Gi-Oh! Should become best of 1. I am simply saying that the debate is far more nuanced than best of 1 bad. If you want my opinion on this whole debacle, I think Master Duel's last problem right now is best of 1. I believe there are a lot of interesting deck building dimensions that best of 1 could have in Master Duel if it wasn't for one issue, and that is Max C. Max C essentially makes it so every single deck needs 3 Max C, 3 Ash, 2 Called By, 1 Crossout, and maybe even Bell. This makes it so every single game first boils down to: did he draw Max C? Did I draw Ash or Called By? Did he draw Bell for Called By? Before the real game even begins. And then, when the real game has begun and I have set up my board, now they need to wonder: did he open Max C on top of combo? Did I draw Ash or Called By? Did he draw Bell for Called By? And did my board have a Baron on top to negate whatever they have to negate my Max C? This Max C minigame, as dubbed by Farfa, essentially makes it so about 10 slots in your deck that could have otherwise been interesting cards for going first and second and so forth are just stolen for this ridiculous auto-lose minigame. Hell, we could even be playing some back row removal in those slots because some decks right now do have solid back row and dealing with it isn't bad, and it would also fix a part of the floodgate issue. But of course, right now that's impossible because we have the auto-lose minigame to worry about first and foremost. This makes it so the best of 1 format could actually be an interesting deck building challenge, but right now it cannot be. On top of that, floodgates are of course a pest in a best of 1. Exactly, because there is no room for any back row removal. Thus right now we are perpetually stuck in formats that are more draw Called By than actually playing Yu-Gi-Oh! In conclusion, best of 1 is fine, best of 3 is better, best of 73 is even better, and fuck Max C.